Hello and welcome to the Success Showcase. I'm your host, Eric Lopkin with the Modern Observer Group. And with me, as always, is Chip Janiszewski from the Happiness and Success GPS. Chip, how you doing this week?
I'm doing great. How about you, Eric?
I am doing fantastic. It has been a wonderful week. Several weeks ago, we had a guest on our podcast, Tammy Valeris. And Tammy and I are both contributing authors to Cracking the Rich Code, Volume 14, with Brian Tracy and Jim Britt. And we just found out this week that the book is now an international bestseller, having become a bestseller in the US, UK, Canada, and a couple of other countries. So I am psyched this week.
Oh wow. I know this is not a video podcast, but I'm doing the unworthy thing here today. Congratulations. That's so cool.
Thank you. No, you are definitely worthy. We've been doing this a long time together, and we talk a lot about mindset, which is a big part of the book. And our guest today, I'm actually very excited to have our guest today. Not only is she a speaker about mindset, she also talks on a number of other topics, and she's a host of her own podcast, Power Up with Manal. I'd like to introduce Manal Keen. Welcome.
Thank you. Thank you so much, Eric. And oh my gosh, congratulations. That
Thank
is
you.
a to celebrate. Yes. You know what? We too often in life celebrate big rocks and big wins, which this one is, but we need to remind ourselves to also celebrate the small wins, because that's what gives us purpose, and that's what keeps us going every day.
Absolutely. We need to keep going with those little victories. That's what keeps that, they build. So like using the book as an example, I celebrated finishing my chapter. We celebrated getting it off to the print, each step along the way. And then when the big news came, it was certainly a celebration. So
Yes.
Manal, why don't you tell our listeners a little bit about yourself?
Yes. Thanks, Eric. Thanks, Chip. So I have multiple hats that I play in life, because with all this personality, you cannot just have one, right?
Absolutely.
My day job, I have forever, last 20 years, ran strategy and finance for financial institutions. My passion, my soul, where I sort of come alive, happened 5 years ago when I left the corporate realm and I started exploring sort of my true self and what I wanted to do when I grew up. And I started with going back to the university that I graduated at and becoming an adjunct professor, because there was something inside me that wanted to help others, and especially being in the finance world, wanting other young females to see a female professor standing in front of them. That started the journey. From there, I started a podcast called Power Up with Manal, where I focus on entrepreneurial journeys, leadership, mindset, positivity, and really just the human experience. We forget that we're human. We forget that, it's okay to be in the journey that we're at. We also forget that our journey is our own individual experience, and we're set by so many societal expectations and norms that sometimes we sort of get lost in that mix and that chaos, and we need all this extra validation and acceptance, and we just don't go heads down into what our true self is. And so that was the purpose behind launching the podcast. And honestly, it's been such a blessing and honor since then. I've also been I've ramped up my keynote speaking, because I love to speak. I love being on stage. I want to be a movement. I want to shake it up. And so I've been speaking at a lot of conferences, from startup entrepreneurs to Fortune 500 companies, but all ranging from, I would say, the right side, which is like very mindset, motivation, growth, evolution of mind. But then I also have keynotes where I truly speak about growing through visibility in your P&L, and how to use data and numbers to speak to your business. And so the spectrum is there, and sometimes they come together. And I also have powerup.ai. It's a ecosystem that I'm building so far that eventually will launch an academy for young adults. It's in the works right now, focused on mindset mastery and financial literacy.
That's fantastic and so needed. I mean, financial literacy, unfortunately, is lacking in our educational system. So we really do need to step up and teach kids, not just young adults, but even, as young as elementary school, about how money works.
Yeah, it is. I think this really came from experience, just remembering coming as I would say, I wasn't technically an international student, but I did not grow up in the US. So when I came back for college, just the fact that, and I, of course, came back and the internet was launched the same year I moved back to the US. So there really wasn't Googling and availability of information before I came. And, like it's kind of sad when I think about the world we live in and how financial literacy and even mindset is not part of our secondary education. It's almost like you become an adult and you should have the switch in your head. And now, oh, I know how to deal with relationships and stress and prioritization and, how to deal with, inner self-doubt and how do I grow my money and what does it mean? We're not taught the simplicity of time value of money. And I know I'm kind of getting technical there, but just the simplicity to understand that we need to be growing, whether it's mind, whether it's financial, until it's too late. And it's this sink and swim mentality. So yeah, I agree, Eric. And I love all the work that you guys are doing. And it really speaks volumes. And I think it takes a lot of us who are passionate about this to plant the seeds today so we can see sort of that, trajectory change in the future.
Absolutely. Especially with mindset, people don't understand even the basic concept of a mindset. We've been so conditioned to think of ourselves as part of a group, whether it's based on gender, race, religion, socioeconomic group. Oh, we're a group and we have to behave the same as everybody else in that group. And it doesn't work that way. We are all individuals. There is an author, Jim Butcher, who writes speculative fiction. And I was just reading a whole bunch of his books, and he has a great line in one of them. He says, "What is the point of having free will if you don't get to spit in the eye of destiny?"
Ah, that is such a great line. That's such a great line. So well said. I agree 1000% with you. And I also believe what happens is we don't recognize as we grow into adulthood and into our lives. We also get sucked in sometimes into the day-to-day, so we don't have time to be self-reflective or introspective. But all those sort of ideals and societal norms and expectations and what we are meant to be or what we are told we should be, we don't realize, even if we don't believe in them or we're trying to evolve out of them, that they're there in our unconscious state. Like 95% of our unconscious state drives our conscious state, right? Like our decisions, our daily behaviors, our trigger points. And we don't ever sit down and really unfold that piece of our brain. We don't peel back the onion and actually see, like, why do I react this way? Why am I afraid to simple things like launch X, Y, and Z? Because there are limiting beliefs that you don't realize, right? Whether it's your upbringing, whether it's the household you're in, whether it was the culture. And I think that's the hardest piece, is recognizing in so many words, like what got you messed up as a young adult.
Yes.
Yeah, I mean, I love, you mentioned simple, and I like to use the word simplicity, and Eric has heard this 1,000 times as far as when I talk about, my 4 P's: purpose, passion, positivity, plan. And this year I turned the name of my talk from the power of positivity, turning obstacles into opportunities. I renamed it the kindness platform. And basically the more things change, the more things stay the same. So talk about simplicity. The first thing I talk about is creation. And creation, we all came from loving kindness. That is it. That is the original platform. And what I talk about is if you use that along with all the other ones that we created above and beyond those, so that we can collaborate instead of have competition and all that other stuff, it's so important. But the bottom line is we were all born with loving kindness, all of creation from that. However, as mankind, We walked out of the Garden of Eden with a brain trying to get knowledge, and we also walked out with free will. And with that brain and the free will, we created all kinds of wonderful, wonderful things, all the technology that we're talking about and so on and so forth. But we also created our differences and everything else. And basically, we are just saturated with the differences and the conflict in the differences. And so what you're doing is fantastic, because that's what people are exposed to most of the time, where if we really get back to simplicity, which simplicity, plain and simple, is just the present moment. You have a choice to choose that kindness platform to guide you no matter what you're doing. So you're talking about all the hangups that people have and so on and so forth and whatever. If you just take a pause between the event and your feeling about it, which is your reaction, a feeling, versus your response, which is what you do about it, which in most cases, if you're silent, that's the most important thing to do. That's what it's all about. And all I am is I talk about awareness, and you are too. And basically, I'm not teaching anybody anything. I'm just pulling something out of people that is already there, which is from our being as opposed from our brains.
Yeah.
So,
Yeah, Chip.
and
Oh, you're so right. I'm gonna like tear up here. I had a once upon a time, I remember, and believe it or not, there was a time where Manal was like very fast and aggressive and fiery. I was just my young soul. And I was also in a very, I would say, not very diverse industry. So I think I just kind of made myself that way so I could like pull through the bulldozers. And I remember I would say a coach one time. I wouldn't say a mentor, like a coach who was just very real with me. And I don't think anyone had ever really been that real with me before, because we also fear realness. Like we fear real feedback, right? Because we know, like when you look at yourself in the mirror and the only person that knows the true thoughts in your head, that's the real person you're looking at. And that's the person you need to discover. And I remember I sat in front of him one day and he was like, I was like, I just became VP and I'm going to become this and blah, 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 blah. And he's just laughing. And he's like, Manal, I don't doubt it. But he's like, let me ask you a question. He's like, when do you listen to your silence? And I'm like, silence? No, I don't have time. Silence? I have time? That changed my life. And I remember that was on my 30th birthday. And that changed my life. Like since then, decade plus, I now focus on being introspective, on being reflective, on really meditating. And meditating comes in different forms. I know, everyone has sort of the stereotype of what meditating is, but it could just be going for a run and being in your thoughts, right? I really started understanding my limitations, who I was, the why, my purpose, like these things just started flooding in. And sometimes it's a little overwhelming, I feel, because you're just like, whoa, where did this all come from? But I never stopped, before that.
Yeah, silence is so important, and people don't realize how elusive that silence is. We are surrounded by sound, by messaging, by thought. Even when you think everything is quiet, if you really listen, you'll hear noises from traffic or noises from nature or the sound of a refrigerator humming, or there's always sound around us. And silence is incredibly powerful because your mind immediately starts to fill in the gap that the silence creates. And that's when all of the thoughts come and you start going through. And I'm sure you've had this. I know Chip has, where you're sitting in silence and some memory will pop up and you'll just go, wow, where did that come from? I haven't thought about that in a long time. But all of these memories are what make us who we are. Right. And if we don't think about them, if we don't look at them and how they've changed and created us, then we're sort of going through life blindfolded.
Right, right. No, 100%. Yeah. I completely agree with everything you guys are saying. And I love the new name of your platform, Chip. It's really speaking to me. We need more of that in this world. The world is really hurt, you know? I'm laughing, Eric, because when you were saying sort of like how when we're in our silence, memories, pop in or whatnot, but I was coaching a few individuals about, managing others. And this comes in relationships too, spouses, girlfriends, boyfriends, whatever it may be. Where when there is silence, we also tend to fill in the other person's thoughts by assumptions. And I think that is like the most dangerous thing in the world. And I'm not perfect because I feel like I do that all the time. Until like I was like, whoa, Manal, you have to be purposeful. You have to stop. I don't know what they're thinking. I cannot fill that gap, you know? But I agree with you. And I was reading something about this and coaching others about it last week. So just sort of popped in that also happens. Like we need to stop assuming, and filling in the gaps because that can be very dangerous from a human perspective.
It can be. Yeah. Silence is very powerful. And for the most part, people don't like silence. They find it uncomfortable. And in fact, in a prior career, I was a reporter and I used silence when I would interview people because I would ask a question, they would give an answer, and then I would not go immediately to the next question. I would pause and wait. And invariably, because they didn't like the silence, they would keep talking and fill things in to the point that they were telling me things that they never intended to tell me.
Oh man, that does happen. I was that person once upon a time.
I mean, a great
But I can
example.
laugh about it.
Yes, well, I mean, a great example is I was doing an interview with an actor who was on one of the Star Trek shows, and he was covered in makeup in his role, and was doing the interview, and paused after he had answered one of the questions, and he started talking about the fact that because he spent so much time on set, one of the first things he did was he went out and bought himself a really good bed because he didn't want to have to fight falling asleep. By the time he got home, he wanted to be out like a light.
Oh, wow.
And, it was a funny aside. It was great. So I put that in the article. Well, I had seen him a few months later. I gave him a copy of the article. He's reading through it. He got to that point and started laughing. And he goes, I can't believe I told you that. Yeah, people, will fill in the silence. And if you're not filling in your own silence, as you said, you tend to make an assumption that doesn't necessarily have any basis in reality.
Yeah, we just gave everybody the $1 million tip on how to survive your marriage. We just did.
So
I had myself muted because the storms were here. But anyway, I don't know if you've ever heard of the book, The Four Agreements and the Fifth Agreement by Don Miguel Ruiz. But
I've heard of it. I haven't read it. I haven't read it though.
As soon as you brought up the word assumption, basically, it's Toltec wisdom, which is basically artist wisdom. And what he talks about is the truth, which is being. And then he talks about, as we're growing up, everything else is symbols and so on and so forth. So we are all artists creating our own world. And this is basically the creation stuff that I talked about. But getting back to that, he talks about being victims where everything is wrong and so on and so forth. And then we want to fight it. Then we become Toltec warriors and so on and so forth. But when you mentioned assumptions, the 5 agreements are: number 1, be impeccable with your word, which is be yourself.
Yeah.
2 is don't take things personally.
Right.
Number 3 is don't make assumptions. Number 4 is always do your best. And then number 5 is be skeptical, but learn to listen. And he uses a beautiful example about don't take things personally and assumptions. Now, I know I brought it up on prior podcasts, but picture yourself walking into a mall with several movie theaters, and you walk into the first movie theater and the only person sitting there is you. And you go sit next to yourself and you're watching a movie about your life. And you agree with everything there because it's you. Then
Right.
you go to the next theater, mom's sitting there. You sit next to mom. Mom doesn't know you're there, but you're watching the same movie, only what mom thinks. And now you're starting to disagree with this and say, no, that's not that. Then you do dad, you might do your spouse and so on and so forth. And all of a sudden you are really, really ticked off because everybody doesn't see the world the way that you do. So taking things personally, it really has nothing to do with your world. It has everything to do with the way that they're looking things. So don't take things personally. And on the other side of things, if you're making assumptions, all you're doing is giving control to that too. So
Yeah.
I love that analogy. And the bottom line is, I mean, we have created everything for good or for bad. It's just the way life has been. Again, the more things change, the more things stay the same. So I highly recommend, if you haven't read those, I know that they will help you with your talks. And so
Hey, I have a 22-hour drive back to Texas from Syracuse. Done.
Get them on Audible.
Everything's on your phone. Done.
Yeah, no, put them on, listen to them on Audible. I listen to Audible all the time. Then I buy the books if I like them. But the 4 agreements, I would get the 5th agreement first because it reviews the first 4.
Oh, okay. Love.
Get the 5th agreement. So
Chip, like, it's so easy to say these things. Like, we're sitting here today saying these things, and I don't know who's listening, but depending on where you are in your life, right? Sometimes you listen and you're like, I need to hear this, but I still get triggered. I take things personally. This don't take things personally is the easiest yet hardest thing to do as a human being.
Yes, it's
so hard, especially, and I like how you mentioned family, because I think it's where you have love, you do tend to take things a little more personally, criticism and all that stuff. What is your sort of life mantra there? How do you go about telling people how to overcome things like that?
present moment awareness. It's a choice. That's all it is. You can choose positivity, and there is that gap between your reaction and your response. And if you can guide that with simplicity, patience, compassion. Lao Tzu said that before Christ was born. Simplicity is just taking a look at the event for what it is. Patience is trying to decide whether you're going to do something about it or not. But if you look at it and treat everything with compassion, that's what it's all about. That's the kindness platform right there. So, and it took me, I mean, I just hit a big birthday. You said, 40 or whatever, but I just hit 70 a couple of months ago. And basically, so what I'm doing now is a culmination of everything that I've learned.
Chip's advice, I can see him.
But one of my favorite quotations, which I use all the time, is don't take yourself so seriously. Nobody else does. And Eric has heard this analogy a lot too when I talk about growing up and so on and so forth. I call it the empty courtroom example. And I have a slide, and there's an empty courtroom there, and I pop in and say, you are the judge, you are the accused, the jury box is empty. And I said, where are the jurors? Guess where they are? In their own courtrooms.
Right.
Don't take yourself so seriously. Nobody else does.
That's great advice.
It's basically, these are just grounding mantras that you can use to kind of get yourself straight where you're getting bombarded with all these different things. So
no, I love that. I had an individual who I admire on my podcast by the name of Robert Macham, and he used a term that I love, and I hijacked now, but he's like, you need to recognize when you are becoming emotionally hijacked. And when you start pre-recognizing that is when you can start controlling your triggers, your assumptions, your way of life, your behaviors, the compassion you have for others, understanding, right? Because now you're not so reactive, you're processing, you're allowing yourself to process, right? Yes. And that's such great advice. I have a little bit of a story, and I think you're going to find this a little interesting. So I mentioned that I left corporate about 5-6 years ago. because I was Miss Corporate. I loved it. Oh my God, the shiny shoes, the suits, the going to Manhattan 27, I was loved it. I loved it. And I was structured, I was organized, I had this crazy calendar, I raised kids, was great mom, great wife, great corporate citizen, all the mumbo jumbo that I should have kicked out the window a long time ago, because mama has a lot more creativity than I was put into. And so I left. Recently, I went back. And during the time that I left is when I really evolved, I would say. I mean, I've been, you should always be evolving, continuously evolving, but I really just made, I would say, a paradigm shift in my everything, in my entire being, like in my soul. And I feel it, right? I had to go back recently, temporarily. And it's so interesting because I'm not the same Manal in corporate. I am compassionate now. I'm more understanding. And as you should be, but it's so aggressive that you don't have time, right? At sometimes. Right. But I made it purposeful. And I'm like, no, I will not go back to that, because I will be the leader that should be recognized, although it's not in the industry I'm in, right? And I kid you not, I have been struggling. I've been struggling because I realized my higher elevated self is not understood. And I know this, right? I know this, but for some reason, I don't know why I didn't set the right expectation in my mindset that, oh my God, I'm going to have to be the coach because I'm not going to be understood. And so I've kind of gone through this little turmoil, I would say, the last 4 to 6 months that I have been back. And it has really hit me hard, where I did start taking things personal. I worked really hard on it. I really did. But you're human, you're vulnerable. And I always say this, it is a human experience, and you grow stronger out of vulnerability. And that is also something that in a lot of leadership roles, you sort of are taught not to be, right? To never show your vulnerability, right? Yep. To put a shield. Me as I would say, a Middle Eastern woman, I was also taught culturally, not good, bad, nothing, but just taught to kind of always care for others. So you kind of just avoid thyself, like you're just nurturing to the world, not to you, right? And so all these things just started, it just hit me. I almost felt like I was the superhuman became non-superhuman, and I was like, my cape has fallen off, and I'm like, what is happening?
Well, I think you went back to corporate with the image that you had when you left, but you're not the same person anymore.
I'm not the same person.
It's not as good a fit, or it's not the same fit anymore. And everything that we've been talking about is very simple, but just to be clear, being simple is not the same thing as being easy. Just because something is simple doesn't mean it's not difficult. And I think the example you just gave about taking things personally, yes, we know we're not supposed to take things personally. It's a very simple concept not to do it. It's very hard to implement.
Correct.
Yeah, and believe me, I'm just like everybody else. I do the same thing, but all I have is that awareness, and the simplicity part of it is just, again, getting back to the present moment. So much easier said than done, but as long as you have that awareness and you can work on that through your meditation and everything else in the silence and so on and so forth, so that you're doing that more than you're not. I mean, Eric and I are both networking specialists, and my definition of networking is simply the process of developing win-win relationships. And relationships start with that person in the mirror, because if you don't have that good relationship with yourself, how can you possibly be your best self for everybody else out there? And this is something that I learned over time. I mean, I was, my car, I call it driver's ed, and I have been for a long time through cassettes and CDs, and now audible.com. And the reason I can get away with that is because my birth certificate says Edward Joseph Janiszewski Jr., and I left the hospital as Chip. So I can say driver's ed because that's my real name, but it's basically a life cycle. And the bottom line is, because we've been around a lot longer, we automatically share what we've learned over the years with the younger people, And believe me, I love the younger generation. Everyone that I've been through is better and better and better. My son has two wonderful children. He met his wife online, Match.com. Her parents came over from Cambodia in the 80s, and everybody in that class in the school where he teaches Greenwich Country Day, there's a whole lot of great stuff going on. I have so much confidence because their hangups are not the same ones that we have. They're
Right.
more bombarded technology and
Right.
all this other stuff that's going on and so on and so forth. But I think things are getting better and better and better. And that's the most important thing. And that's not going to be the first thing you're going to hear on the 6 o'clock news tonight. So
Yeah,
That's for
no,
sure.
that's for sure. That's for sure. I was actually gonna say when you had mentioned that you know, teach and you love the young generation, but it's almost like even individuals in my generation, your generation, like multi-generationally, it's amazing how you breach on a lot of individuals who have not kind of gotten to that awareness or that introspective self yet. And it's really sad because we in society have almost like closed those doors, right? We create these routines and these timelines and the daily, and a lot of people are just hustling and working fast and here, there, schedules, and it's almost like we forget to be human and we forget we need each other and that we drive off of each other's frequencies and that connectivity is what makes us stronger. And we did kind of get into a little bit of isolation mode, I feel, in the pandemic, and it is affected. Like I look at my children who were teenagers in the pandemic, right? And now my son's going to college, and so most of his high school was in the pandemic, like when he started. And so he was kind of sitting with me and he was like, it's really strange because I almost feel like I don't know how to feel or I don't have passion for things. Because he's like, I watch you and I'm passionate about anything. Like I was passionate about the gas station blizzard maker. Okay. Like they had these little ice cream cups and you put it in this like vending machine and it like made you a smoothie or a blizzard. And I'm like, whoa, where is it coming from? He's like, you have so much. He's like, where do I get this passion? And I'm like, baby, the passion comes when when you allow yourself to have passion, when you allow yourself to almost feel. I was like, everything's not so black and white. And they make this joke, like they're like, I guess the youngins, say it every time we get riled up. They're like, well, it's not that deep. I'm like, but maybe it should be. Maybe
Very
you should.
true.
I don't know.
We are coming up on the end of our time. So before we wrap up, tell us a little bit about your podcast.
Yeah. So Power Up with Manal is a podcast that has two bits to it. I sort of have this Mondays with Manal, the whole M theme, where I talk about different just societal, behavioral situations or things that are happening. Some are current, some are, I would say, historically, we are still struggling to evolve from. But as the trends happen, especially with technology and AI and mindset and change, a lot of discussions around that. And then in my heart, I just love people. And I am just genuinely enthralled by individuals who go out there and take a risk and start businesses. And I feel like if I sat around more people in my youth as a young adult on who just kind of unconventionally did something for themselves and that they may have not succeeded and that was okay, right? I feel like I might have taken a different course. So the interviewing part of the podcast, interviewing different entrepreneurs with different journeys and different walks of life and how they persevered, really stemmed from the depth of somebody may hear this, even if it's one person, and it may change their life. And I just wanted to put that reality out, because I came from, and this is my personal journey. Everybody has their own journey, but I came from such a structured world. My world was very structured. It was structured growing up. It was structured in corporate. I was structured. I didn't let my shoulders down. Yeah, I was structured person, but I have so much soul, and I almost like didn't allow my soul to shine. And I want, if I could change one person's life, that would make me happy. And so that is what the podcast is about. That's why I use the words power up, because we are in a daily constant of leveling up, powering up, and really becoming a better version of ourselves. The only person we should be in competition with is really ourselves. And that was my whole goal and my reason. And I didn't even think about it. I had a camera, a microphone, and a MacBook.
Fantastic. Well, Manal, I am so glad that you were able to join us on what turns out to be a very special episode, not just because we had you here, but looking through my notes, I have just realized this is our 275th episode. What? And we are wrapping up that 275 episodes at the same time we wrap up our 5th season. We will be back in a few weeks with our 6th season. And and Chip, what do you think is the big takeaway from this episode?
Well, I was going to talk about appreciation in the present moment, and that's a perfect segue to that. I mean, you talked about memories and so on and so forth. Albert Schweitzer said, and this is what you are doing, Manal. You're not teaching. You are just an example. He said, in influencing people, example is not the main thing. It is the only thing. They see it on you. They're sensing that by listening to us on the podcast. They can imagine the three of us smiling. But if instead of us walking up to people saying, you got to do this, you got to do that, and so on and so forth, people expect to get taught in school and preached at in church, and that's it. You got to be an example. So keep it up. It's great. Spread the word because it's contagious.
Thank you. Thank you guys so much for having me on here. I'm forever grateful and appreciative for this experience. Thank you.
It was fantastic having you. I think for me, the big takeaway comes down to keeping things simple. Your passion is within you. You just have to let it out. And that's a lot of, what we've been talking about is be yourself, be passionate, and enjoy those little things like that blizzard machine. I think that was a great example. So thank you for being here. It's been great talking with you.
Thank you.
You've been listening to the Success Showcase. You can catch every episode at xvadio.com, the Apple Podcasts app, Google Podcasts, Spotify, iHeartRadio, Audible, Amazon Music, and wherever you find podcasts. Remember, make this your best week ever and make next week even better. We'll see you then.